A warm welcome to our viewers on YouTube. This is the service from Eastminster United Church in Belleville, Ontario, Canada, on July 17th, 2016. My name is Gary Magarrell, and the sermon title today is Saint or Sinner, Any Preference? Welcome. I was thinking as I was driving around our city and the surrounding countryside, how beautiful it all is in the middle of July. Many flowers have bloomed and gone, while others mature to show off their beauty. Even though it's been so dry for a few weeks, plants still struggle to live and to produce their flowers and their seeds. This summer on July the 9th, our house was one of 8 gardens invited to be on the annual Canadian Federation of University Women's Belleville Garden Tour. That's quite a mouthful. We agreed after some years of shying away from it because of all the work, but thought it was our year to do our part to be a part of this worthy cause to raise money for scholarships for girls to university. A garden takes devotion at the best of times. My friend loves gardening, which is a gift for me. But though I was raised in rural Manitoba, where we had large vegetable and flowers beds, the gardening bug never hit me. So this spring it has been exciting to see the garden really take shape, in spite of the dryness. All appeared well except for the appetites of the rabbits, which have a taste for the most exotic and the most expensive plants. You may have noticed that. It seems to me that rabbits have that wonderful ability to assume that all we do is primarily for their enjoyment. And certainly the thoughts we direct towards these rabbits this year were anything but pleasant or generous. I'm sure that's never happened to you. So in spite of all of these factors, the tour was deemed a success by the group of 270 tickets sold, and our frayed nerves have settled down. This tense experience, as with so many other circumstances, including the ways we act and speak, do not always bring out the best in us. In spite of our good intentions, we slip very quickly into being less than we know we can or should be, or strive to be. In thinking about a title, I decided on calling it Saint or Sinner, Any Preference, with a question mark. It arises for me from the many attempts that we have, and I have, to reach above the pettiness of things and the quick reactions which rarely exhibit the best in us. And my question really is, how do we come to grips with this struggle playing out within us? If this is just the way it is to be human, should we care at all? The Oxford Dictionary defines for us these 2 words, saints and sinners. We'll begin here with definitions and see where it leads us. According to the dictionary, saints are defined as holy, canonized, or officially recognized as having won by exceptional holiness a high place in heaven and veneration on earth. We tend to expand this word saint more towards someone who tries very hard and has been seen to be remarkable in their relationships and ability to care for and assist other people. Excuse me for a moment. Sinner in the dictionary is a person who perpetrates an act of transgression, especially willful, against divine law or principles of morality. Think of the ancient listing of the 7 deadly sins. I'm not going to ask us all to repeat them. See how many of you know them. Pride, covetousness, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth or laziness. Have any of us been guilty of some or all of these 7 deadly sins? I don't intend to have us break into small groups to share those times that we have slipped into these. We're not going to bare our soul to one another. But I remember as a kid in Sunday school, and we had a teacher, a marvelous teacher. She was a bit monotonous in her voice, and she had a wonderful hat that she kept moving this way, then this way. We remember the hat very well. And she tried to get over to us the importance of these deadly sins. Probably we were too young to understand it all. But I always remember them because of that. So this word sinner we tend to expand to one who offends against or commits acts knowingly which are destructive or at best are not helpful. We could all list examples of sinfulness with this definition, I think. So as you look at these two words and their definitions, we all with perhaps regret guess we are squarely in the sinner category. And I'm not going to ask if anybody yet is in the saintly one. But it is possible to move towards the saint category. Is it? I don't know. More about this a little later. I want to talk about the scripture lessons we had this morning first. Our first lesson read today, Psalm 3, is believed to have been written by King David himself, who had reigned over Israel for many decades. He had many sons. And this episode refers to his son Absalom, who was a warrior, very popular and very impatient. Absalom did not want to wait until his father David died before he became king. We can understand Absalom's position as crown prince. Not an easy one. We remember how long the future Edward VII was in the role of Prince of Wales, as his mother, Queen Victoria, had a long reign. And Prince Charles is in exactly the same position. The difference here is that Absalom was not willing to wait. He raised an army against his father and for a time actually pushed his father out of Israel. The words of the third psalm are believed to have been written by him as he fled his son's army. He was faced with his own son's rebellion and the pain of the deep disappointment in the whole situation, let alone his son. In time, David did regain his throne, and against all advice, he forgave his son. Sometime later, Absalom rebelled again. And finally, David had to act to stop the cycle of division and war. In this psalm, David is not afraid of separation from God or the loss of his kingdom, for he states, "Deliverance belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people." In other words, it was not in his hands concerning the future of his throne or the outcome of his son's rebellion. It would be whatever it was to be. And as we know, in time, his kingdom was inherited by Solomon rather than his impatient Absalom, whose belief in his entitlement caused such pain and disappointment, leading eventually to his own death. Then we have our second reading from Paul's letter to the Romans, a very strong passage. Paul is pointing out that the Jews are no better than the Greeks in terms of saintliness or even access to God's forgiveness. The laws they so studiously studied and followed did not guarantee them any special favor with God. And Paul states this, quote, "None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they've all gone wrong. No one does good, not even one." Rather a harsh judgment on these leaders who proclaim to seek to be deemed good by God. For all their chanting and prayers, Paul goes on to write, "Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive." They should have read that to some of us at theological college when we were going through. It's a condemnation by Paul of those who believe by their own good works they can reach this level of acceptance and saintliness. He was never one to mince words, especially on those who think they are on the path to glory with God. The sin, of course, is the sin of smugness, of elitism, sense of entitlement, and separateness from others deemed less holy than they. Nevertheless, we have to feel some empathy with the Jewish religious leaders who tried so hard and wanted so badly to be acceptable to God. They truly worked at it and naturally felt all this effort should be honored and admired by everybody else and ultimately rewarded by God. Paul's reminder to these religious folk that we are all sinners is made understandable and true by our own experience, and we know that. Try as we might for goodness, we slip quickly behind as old habits come to the fore, reminding us of our weaknesses and shortcomings. We understand intuitively that we all stand together in the sinner category, even those who try hard for goodness and try harder than we do. Paul goes back to his own experience. He had once been a rigid believer himself in that philosophy of living righteously in the world for God. He was a scholar in the subject, and his zeal made him lead to a crusade against this new religion, stemming from the man Jesus of Nazareth. He stood at the side of the crowd when Stephen was stoned to death for being a Christian, the first Christian martyr. He had no pity in his heart for Stephen, only judgment that he deserved to die in this cruel manner. To Paul, then known as Saul, this new faith had to be wiped out, and the sooner the better. But then Saul had a conversion experience no one can explain. Whatever happened, it changed him. He took the name of Paul to illustrate his new life, and he studied with the followers of Jesus what it meant to be a believer. He realized that nothing he could do, before or after, in his own life as a strict Jew or now as a Christian, could erase his past mistakes or guarantee his ability for goodness before God. He says he tried everything, and often successfully, as he was sure he had pleased God. But now he recognized that nothing he could do or say in and of itself could make him right before God. Goodness came from the forgiveness of God and through love and service to others. Paul was a powerful evangelist, as much as anything, because he knew he was a sinner and readily admitted it. He had even caused people to be put to death for their belief in Jesus. So he would say to new seekers who came every day looking at the faith, who felt they could never be worthy because of their history, and he would say, look, if I, who persecuted even to death the followers of Jesus, have received forgiveness and mercy, anyone can. The Apostle Peter was very much the same with new seekers. 3 times he said, when my Lord needed me, I denied even knowing him. What could you do worse than that, my friend? If I not only received forgiveness and have been allowed to be a leader in this new faith, you can also receive God's forgiveness and new life and be at one with one another. Both of these men have been declared saints for their work and personal witness. By their lives and example, they have shown us that the label of sinner need not stop us from doing anything in the world. This great gift of love and forgiveness we have experienced propels us into the world to tell our story of redemption and life. So then, if we cannot reach the status of saint on our own, and if we remain in the sinner category no matter what we do, is it worth the struggle for goodness? This is a big issue. You hear it with your neighbors and friends who aren't necessarily religious, this struggle to find a way to be good and to do the things they believe human beings are born to be, and wondering how they're ever going to become what they would like to see themselves become, quite apart from the Christian experience. Peter and Paul would tell us that the category of saint is not achievable if it means separation from life or one another. Both these men believed in the importance of striving to be more like Jesus every day, in every situation. As we do so, we reach out to others in love, forgiveness, and joy. Everyone can travel this road, sometimes very rocky, but always an adventure. Now that I'm fully retired, I often go away for part of the winter to Australia. I found my church home at Richmond Uniting Church there. As with the United Church of Canada, the Uniting Church of Australia is a combination of Methodist, Presbyterian, and Congregational churches. We united in 1925. The Australia Uniting Church came into being in 1977. Richmond Uniting Church is in an old, early settled area, rapidly gentrifying in the middle of the city. The Reverend Dr. Sally Douglas is the minister. She's also a specialist, I think I mentioned her before, in the first 100 years of worship experience of Christianity, and gives seminars and lectures at the theological school. As she points out, everybody was new to the evolving faith, centered on the experience and teaching of Jesus of Nazareth. The leaders were learning as they went. It was exciting, though harrowing times in which to live. Everyone's faith story and journey was important, as together, this great mixture of persons from all over, men and women of all ages, all languages, all nationalities, studied and worshiped together. She does not believe it an accident that time and again in the Gospels, Jesus is recorded as seeing people when no one else was able to see them. No one was just a man or just a woman to Jesus. He saw into their inner souls and brought out the goodness which was there. She goes on to point out that to us, that in a week of devastating race-related violence around the world, we're reminded of the power of actually seeing one another. It's so potent and powerful. Too often we judge people by what we see on the surface and from the hearsay shared only eagerly by others. Jesus had time for anyone and invited them into a close and working relationship with God and with other people. When you read the story of the New Testament, the life of Jesus, Jesus used whatever was around him to witness. He stood on the hills, he stood in a boat, he went into a private home in his own community. All those opportunities that we have ourselves. It's interesting, the people that were called to accompany Jesus those many years ago. No one was steeped in years of study and piety. Rather, he chose people from all walks of life. They were to watch. They were to learn. They were to be in community with one another. And it was in the crucible of their daily life together. That's where they were to find their faith and calling. Very exciting and very terrifying at the same time. That's our life. We're in the same place. We struggle each day to discover what it is that we are meant to be. And we do it in community. So the question of this sermon, saint or sinner, any preference, it may be thought-provoking, but it's not really one you can answer. We all want to be better than we are. But sainthood is hard to achieve. We're called to be the best we can where we find ourselves. And we find ourselves in the category of sinner. Being a saint can never be easy, unachievable. But our status as a sinner is a good start as we struggle to be the best we can where we are and where we find ourselves. And we don't need to give up the journey, and we don't want to give up the journey. These words are so right in our new creed. We are not alone, thanks be to God. We walk with God. We walk in love. We share our love with one another. And by our example, we make a difference. By the example of others, we learn. And by being in community together, we begin to understand what the community of faith is to be. Amen.